Great. I think we're going to. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Just getting into the group now, and just going to wait for people to kind of come and join us. There we are. Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you with us in the group, Tanja. We've been trying to arrange this for a little while, but it's just getting schedules right, you know. And
obviously, I remember when we first talked about it. It was last year, wasn't it?
It was last year. Yeah,
it was last year.
I really wanted to be one of the first ones in the group, really. But there is kind of a reason for that, and we're going to look at that a little bit as we have a chat today. Because obviously you've got a very exciting new project and initiative that you started with the lovely Michelle Dart, who might make an appearance later. Who knows?
I think she might.
I hear if you say her name 3 times, she appears. So we'll try.
Yeah.
But we're going to come on to that because, and I think the whole ethos, the philosophy behind that, is just so important, and it would be really cool to unpack that tonight, Janet. I think that would be really great. So a lot of people obviously know of you and your work, and I think it just shows what an influence you've had really in the community. They might know you from your canine confidence work, or TTouch, or ACE, of course, and your book, You're Under the Lead. But to start us off, tell us a little bit about how Janet got involved with dogs anyway. How did that story come about?
Okay, so Janet and dogs goes back. I mean, I don't have very many memories, and we might come on to that a bit later in terms of what that might mean. But one of my memories is, my first memory is sitting in a pushchair, cuddling a Sheltie puppy, because we were both scared of the traffic. And dogs have been in my life forever. I don't remember a time we didn't have dogs. My mother was also very, very passionate about dogs. And so, yeah, we had dogs all through my growing up. And then when I as soon as I could, because I went off to university, did all the sort of usual stuff, but as soon as I could, I wanted my own dog, and I ended up getting a Maremma. An Italian sheepdog, beautiful dog. Now, you might wonder why a person should get a Maremma. We'd had Shelties growing up, and why I would just suddenly get a Maremma. But I had a friend who bred Maremmas, and so I knew them, and I ended up getting into dogs that way. I started training dogs when I, like a lot of people, had a problem. So when my first boy was, he was 3 when I got him, and he had a few issues, but it was actually another dog that I had later who had some significant medical issues, and ended up, I mean, he ended up being put to sleep, and it was one of the most traumatic things that I've had. And still, it's like 20 plus years ago, and it's still something where I kind of go, could I have done more? And so I ended up on this quest to see if I could have done more. And I was, so I went and did TTouch. Sarah became a very big influence. Sarah Fisher has been a mentor ever since the sort of mid 2000s. And so, yes, I kind of moved through that process. And I think it was because I had, well, first of all, Ambrose, but then I had a little lurcher who just happened into my life. She was, I was driving home from work one day, and she just turned up. She was stray on the ring road, and she was incredibly reactive. And when I first took her out, she screamed her head off at a dog I could barely see across the other side of the park. And I have to confess that the thing that I first thought was, I hope somebody's looking for this dog so that she can go home, because I didn't want another dog like that. But she actually became my heart dog, and was the reason that I ended up focusing on reactivity and the You're Into the Lead stuff and all the rest. But I think a lot of it, a lot of the focus I've had has also been on the person. And that really came from my other part of my life. So I wasn't always a dog trainer. I was an academic for a good 20 years. And my focus was on, funnily enough, human-computer interaction. So I was interested in and doing research on the whole thing of how people and computers work together, and what you need to do if you're designing technology for people and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things we ended up looking at was looking at ways to help students as well, because I was teacher there. I was a university teacher, so I was looking at ways to help students, and we looked at a lot of different techniques, and many of them were around different forms of learning, different forms of learning, coaching, helping people to find their own route through things. So rather than sort of telling people what was what, we would sort of be helping them to find what was meaningful for them. And I realized when I started working with people with reactivity that a lot of what I had been doing previously was relevant there as well. So a lot of the stuff that I started looking at was from the psychology that I did when I was doing human-computer interaction, from the coaching that I did when we were looking at student learning, and bringing that into how we actually work with our clients and how we help people to deal with the things that come up for them when they have a dog who has issues, because, or say issues, have things that make life difficult for us effectively. It's not so much the dog, is it? It's more us. So yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a, I think, gone around the houses a little bit, but I think what I found is that everything comes together, and so you find yourself drawing on, I mean, I'm drawing on things that I learnt in a completely different life, and I'm bringing that in. And one thing that I've always done, and that I did when I was in computer science as well, because I started off in English literature and then switched to computer science and then to dog training, so kind of jumped around a lot. And what I think is that we do best when we actually can bring together different perspectives and try and learn from as many different spaces and in as many different places as we can. And that's what I've sort of tried to do ever since. So yeah, and I went TTouch ACE, and yeah, now we're here.
And I think this is really important, because I think we all, not all, many of us have come to working with dogs as not as our first career or our first kind of profession, and it's amazing the things that we draw on from our previous experiences, and that's the richness of life, of course. And a lot of the things you were involved with fundamentally was still around support and nurture and care, and us actually breaking down things into ways that, especially on your academic career, for sure, this notion of having that analytical brain to be able to think, how do I break those component parts down so that the other can learn and pick up the things that they need. So those are really important transferable skills, really. And so did you find then, coming from quite that kind of analytical brain, and especially how formulaic some dog training can be, when you came into the influence of TTouch, that must have been a really different vibe for you. Did you connect to that straight away? Anything? Yeah, this is cool. Or did you think, this is a little bit different, I'm just going to have to feel my way into this a little bit? Yeah,
I think probably when you talk analytical brain and me, I don't think of myself in that as particularly analytic. I mean, I have to be, because I was a researcher for 20 years and, was reasonably good at it. So,
and you got a PhD, of course, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I did a PhD in computer science. So so there must be some analyticalness somewhere in there. But I've also got very much the support that you were talking about, the nurturing side of things, the feeling your way and actually feeling things and feeling intuitively about things has been very strong for me. So I didn't have a great deal of issue with TTouch, and I had an issue with was some of the ways that it was talked about. So sometimes it would be talked about in a way that I kind of thought, well, that's not really what's happening. People would talk about, and it was more that it was, I don't mind things being, what's the word? Metaphorical. So if you're talking about sort of switching on lights metaphorically, then that's something, but when you're talking about things that and presenting it biologically and it's not biological, you kind of think, what's going on? But for the most part, I could actually see the science in TTouch. I could see very strongly that, when you are influencing an animal's body, then you're going to be creating more balance, more comfort in that body, then you're going to allow that animal to be more balanced emotionally. That seemed logical to me. It seems perfectly logical to me. And I mean, I don't do as much TTouch now since I've been working more in ACE, more because it's often not the thing that I want to do first off. So touching animals, we may want to do it in the sense that, you know, everybody sees a dog and just goes, "Oh, I want to talk to that dog." But from the animal's perspective, that is not necessarily what is needed as the first pass. So I mean, I'll still obviously be using TTouch when I am handling animals, but I would be starting off probably with more of the hands-off approach of ACE and observing and things like that. But yeah, I never saw it as, I never really saw TTouch as a, you know, we talk about things being woo, and I know some people think of TTouch in that category. I never did, because it seems very, very obvious to me. And I have a very pragmatic view of science, having been a research scientist for 20 odd years, having been a research professor. I have seen the reality of peer review. I have seen how subjective peer review actually is. I have seen how panels, I've been on panels for research projects, for awarding research grants, for editing journals, all these sorts of things. I've done all of those things. And it is not an exact science. It is not something where we can sort of say the science is, you know, this idea that there is a thing called the science and we should be following it as if it was a sort of somebody that's walking down the street. It doesn't work like that. It's not meant to work like that. And so for me, a lot of the time, the things that we're seeing are things that we don't yet have evidence for. It doesn't mean that they're not valid. It just means that somebody hasn't been able to do the science, do the studies on, because they haven't got the money to do it. I know how expensive it is to do proper research in, you know, the sort of research that gets published in peer-reviewed journals. Or, you know, maybe it's not something that's easily, you know, that allows itself to be studied in that way, because it's, as you're saying, it's the study of one, it's the study of the individual, whether that's the individual practitioner or the individual animal. It's not something that you can generalize in the same way. So I have a very pragmatic view of science, and I follow, yeah, of course, I want to see evidence, absolutely want to see evidence for things. But I also will look at things and say, okay, so we haven't got evidence for this specific thing, but what evidence have we got that makes this specific thing actually quite likely to be the case, you know, which for things like TTouch and ACE, where, you know, we don't have scientific studies because nobody's going to pay for scientific studies. So the end result of that is that we look for the evidence of things that back it up rather than that actually show that it works itself.
And those are really important points, and I think this is something that we need to talk about a lot more as well, because we have kind of weaponized science a little bit in the dog training community, and you can see why, because obviously back in the day it was a bit of a wild west out there and everybody was just making really outrageous claims on things. But like you say, it does have its limitations, and I do wonder actually, Janet, whether some of the studies that might need to be done would ever be done from an ethical point of view now.
Well,
you know,
yeah,
that boat's
there is that
on.
as well. There is.
And we've got people like Amber Batson, of course, and Kathy Connor and others who are extrapolating information from the science we do have, and allowing that to make that kind of jump multi-species and think, well, you know, this is the thing I think about coming through an ACE and TTouch point of view, TTouch route, about really learning the art of good observations about the individual anyway. And this will bring us nicely into talking about well-being in a moment, because it's very easy, and it is easier to kind of study and make assumptions around a homogenized group. So, you know, quite often people talk about dogs. You know, this is what dogs do. This is how dogs do this. But the question then is, well, who are the dogs? You know, and it's a bit like, as I've said on other things, it's like when politicians talk about the people. Yeah. Well, who are the people, right? Yeah. So actually, when you start looking at more at the individual, you have to be happy to embrace the anecdotal, embrace the subjective, actually, while still keeping your feet planted in some kind of scientific perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's what TTouch and ACE really provide, along with the other things, is the ability to do really good observations well for the individual.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what's interesting about, to me, about the observations is, I mean, we look at the observations, and if you look at Sarah's work going back decades now on observation and the details of observation that she's looked at, those things are actually, you know, they're showing up now in the literature. So people are talking, when you look at Daniel Mill's paper, for instance, and that really great paper about pain and behavior, and the examples there where they say the dog was not showing any clinical signs. They did x-rays, they couldn't find anything, but the gait was strange and the leg was pointing out this way and there was a slight imbalance in the, you know, whatever. And it just shows that the sorts of observations that we've been looking at and saying, what is going on with this animal because this isn't balanced, are now showing up in the examples that are coming up in the literature. And I did the Geeking ACE talk over in ACE in August at the beginning of the month. And I mean, one of the papers in there that I talked about was, it's again, horrible science, but it's and not ethical, I don't think, but it's obviously passed its ethics tests because it's recent, and it shows that coat change happens as a result of pain. The massive coat change happens as a result of pain, and studies that have done on rats and mice, and yeah, I think that it's interesting to, you know, if we get ourselves caught up in if there isn't a paper to prove it, and that's the other thing I find, you know, nothing proves anything. Science is not about proving truth, it's about proving falsehood. So, you know, it's not about this is true, it's just saying, well, there's some evidence, there's a strong body of evidence in support of this, or there's a less evidence in support of that. But the evidence of observation is also valid, and there is a whole body of science that relies on the study and the observation of humans. You know, ethnography that's what it does. And you're looking qualitatively at observations and noting what is going on, and then making assessments or making analysis based on that. And I think that's what we get to do with the individuals in terms of dogs, because yeah, we can make some generalizations, but a lot of the time we're talking about this particular dog who's in front of us. What are their needs? What is going on for them? What is their state of well-being? Which is the kind of interest that I have, is what does that actually mean? And you know, that will encompass their physical state, which is going to influence how they feel. It's going to include their mental state. So, you know, are they being driven mad by not having access to things that are important to them? And it's going to include their social state. So are they, you know, in an appropriate social situation for that animal? But I mean, that will change. You know, I have 2 dogs here, one of whom would be perfectly happy if the only other being she ever saw was me, and the other who is life and soul of every party, you know. And dogs are not, like you say, they're not homogenous. They are individuals, and we can look at and observe what is going on for each individual that we live with, that we work with, and see then what we do to improve the quality of their life and improve their well-being.
I think that's really important. This is part of the increasing focus now, isn't it? Because you know, I term that the emotional experience. It's only because that's a term that I bring from my human side of things. But and just the notion that whilst we all have one, they're all very unique to us as individuals, and this is what that's about. It's learning more about that kind of truth, if you like. It's interesting for me seeing a lot of the debate and a lot of the the camps that get formed within animal behavioral science, and seeing the similarities there for human behavior science, actually, and human psychology and all this kind of thing. And I think the reality is, whilst we can join the dots, I think more generally, you know, there is only one Janet, there is only one Andrew, and that kind of infinitesimal combination of things that go into creating us, and us that was different even to yesterday, right?
Oh yes,
we've changed.
Absolutely.
Science would find it really hard to get a grips on that, other than look at the general stuff.
Yeah. And certainly one strand of science would never be able to cover that. So the other thing we've got to remember about science is there isn't a single science. You know, you've got biological science, you've got physical sciences, you've got social science, you've got neuroscience, you've got behavioral science. So you've got a whole different set of lenses, and each lens will come and give you a completely different picture. And it's like you're looking through this little lens and you're seeing one bit of an individual, and another lens will give you another bit of an individual. So you can look at the same individual through different lenses of different sciences, and both are true. Both will give you some element of reality for that animal, but neither will give you a full picture. And I think that's what we've been missing when we got hung up in the industry on, well, the only thing that matters is behavioral science, the only thing that matters is, you know, positive reinforcement, whatever. It's not. It is not. And it's great that things are moving and that we're getting people coming in, giving different perspectives, and we're seeing the medical side, we're seeing the psychology, we're seeing the neuroscience, because those things give you a different perspective on the same. And it doesn't mean one's, you know, it doesn't negate something else. It just means that you've got multiple lenses, and multiple lenses are really important, I think.
And often, I think when we look at an individual science lens, there is a tendency to go further and further in, because, you know, because that's, especially for our colleagues in academia and within science more generally, there is a kind of focusing on the little, so it just gets closer and closer. A lot of this actually is about us stepping back and having more of a philosophical look. And as you say, it's not about rights and wrongs, it's about trying to find out what's important to that individual now. And that's the term that I use, the term relief for that, of course, but it doesn't really matter however you want to frame it. So this, so I can really see then, Janet, and actually when we spoke before, probably last year, or it might be the year before, I can't remember, we were already discussing things. You were already sharing with me about some of where you felt you wanted your energies to start to be put regarding this notion of how do we identify and support, when you think about it, multiple nervous systems that are all at play at the same time, because you have the dog or dogs, you have the caregiver or caregivers, and then you have the professionals. And this comes into this notion then of what you and Michelle are looking at bringing together with the Heart Dog, I want to say initiative, project, I don't know how you want to classify it. So tell me a little bit about how you started thinking about the notion of well-being and what that means for you, and how you feel we should be looking at classifying that, if you like, or feeling about that. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right, that there's, we have any being, any individual being is influenced and influences the other beings around them. And as you say, that will be different in all different contexts. So environmental elements all come into that as well. But fundamentally, when we're looking at well-being, I think we're looking at what makes us feel safe in that moment. So safety is fundamental to us as humans, and I've spent the last couple of years really, I mean, I've spent the last 10 years probably doing this in terms of it to some degree, but certainly quite intensively in the last couple of years, looking at that from a human point of view. So looking at that from the point of view of me personally, you know, what is it that makes me feel safe? What do I need to feel safe in any given situation? And that might seem like a strange question, but I think safety is so fundamental to our well-being, because if we feel unsafe in any element of our life, whether that's our emotionally unsafe, maybe it's to do with stuff that we are dealing with from previous life, from our experiences. Maybe it's we're dealing with something that's going on for us now. And as soon as we feel emotionally unsafe, everything changes in life. So, you know, you can be going along feeling, you know, everything's great, and you would say your well-being was good. And then suddenly something happens to throw that out. It happened to me in December. You know, my mum died in December, and my mum has been like my biggest influence in my life. She was an incredible person. She was my safe space. And I realized actually that when she died, I was thrown into, I'm gonna get emotional, and that's fine, because emotion is just showing things matter. Yeah, I found myself in this place where suddenly the things that I thought were to do with how I felt, where I felt safe, so places, going home to Cumbria, which is where I grew up, suddenly didn't matter anymore. Suddenly those things were not important, and I realized that the safe space was actually my mother, and therefore losing her meant that everything else got thrown up in the air. And I think safety is that thing that underpins everything. And when you feel safe, you may not actually call it that, but that is what well-being is all about. So feeling physically safe, feeling physically well, feeling strong enough to be able to, you know, if you're feeling ill, you don't feel physically safe. Emotionally safe, to feel that you are following a path that actually aligns with your values, aligns with what you want to spend your time doing. And another situation that I as you know, I kind of went into work in in Powered Dog, and you know, there was a lot of great stuff in Powered Dog, but what I realized when I was in there was that it wasn't aligned to where I wanted to be, and the things I was doing were not the things I wanted to be doing. So I wanted to be doing much more about the stuff from the heart, the getting in touch with other people, connecting with people from the heart, and that wasn't working in that environment. So I think there's a lot of stuff that relates to us that I've been looking at, and some of it's quite deep stuff about going back to what the trauma you've experienced and all those sorts of things. And I don't need to go into the details of things, but I think safety is at the root of it all. And the important thing to remember about safety is that we get part of our sense of safety from the people around us, and that is a mammalian thing, so that applies to our dogs as well. So this is why it's really important that we look at well-being from the point of view of not just the dog and not just the human, but all of the people who are involved with the care of that dog. So that's why Heart Dog has this three-stranded focus on the dog, the caregiver, the guardian, and the professionals who are caring for both of them. Because if any one of those feels unsafe, the others will. And if the well-being is not cared for, if the well-being is not taken care of for any one of those, then it will influence the well-being of the others. And that's all. I think did you have Carolina on fairly recently, and she was talking about polyvagal theory, and this comes from there, you know, this concept of neuroception that we that Stephen Porges talks about, where he's talking about it's subconscious, it's our nervous systems recognizing whether we are safe in any given environment, and the things that the nervous system is monitoring are our internal state, how safe do we feel, and that's going to be influenced by our physical state as well, and the internal state of other people, so other beings around us. So our dog will be monitoring us, we'll be monitoring, if we're there as a trainer, all the nervous systems are all monitoring each other, and if there's any sense of being unsafe, that's going to influence everybody. So we have to, and also the way we communicate also is an influence on that and the environment. So I think we need to look at all of these elements together to be able to actually support the well-being of any one of them. That
That's really powerful, isn't it? And I think we use the word safety sometimes quite glibly, actually, without thinking about how visceral that is and how important that is. And actually, this has been a big issue for us as on a professional side of things within a community that has not felt safe at times. And especially when we think about, kind of functions like social evaluative threat that our brains kind of designed for, this notion of social rejection, how painful that can be. We have to be better at allowing others as a first port of call, I feel, to be heard, to truly be heard, because that's the first foundation for that safe space, as you say. But then also bearing witness to that, what that might be. And I don't think we've necessarily been very good at that as a community, both with each other. Sadly, you and I, and I know others recently, we've had our fair share of stuff that's been thrown at us, and it gets very tricky, especially when it's deliberately hateful and designed to cause harm. We can all fall out, and we can all have a bit of a bitch at times, but that's very different to people deliberately looking to harm. But and I think a lot of this is because people don't feel safe. They just don't realize it.
I think that's right. And I think when people don't feel safe, they lash out. And there are lots of situations where people don't feel safe. So obviously we often talk about our dogs not feeling safe, and I've worked for years with reactive dogs, which I don't tend to use the term, but dogs who find the situations they're in unsafe, effectively. That's what we're talking about. And the impact of that on their people is that their people don't feel safe either. So if you've got a dog who is going to kick off at another dog and you don't know, many of my clients, they would say things to me like, I don't know if I can hold them. I don't know if I can hold on to them. If that when they're reacting to another dog or to a human, and I'm scared about that. So there's a fear, there's a lack of safety that comes just from that behavior. And sometimes I think we are incredibly judgmental of our clients. We have this and even in the language we use, talking about compliance as if somehow people have to do what we tell them. And if somebody's not doing, if somebody's called you in for this is my perspective on this is, if somebody calls you in because they need help, need support with the dog, and then they don't do the things that you suggest to them, the chances are that's because there's a reason behind that. And it's not because they're being lazy, and it's not because they're being pig-headed. It's usually because maybe they don't feel safe doing it. Maybe it doesn't quite fit in with their life, or maybe they're getting flack from somebody else when they try and do it, or maybe they're not sure that they understand it, or there's a whole set of things that it could be. But what, as we as professionals, to be able to take the well-being of our clients into account, we have to look at the whole picture for them as well. And what will work for one client won't work for another client. So if we go in there with a kind of cookie cutter approach and say, this is how you deal with reactivity, or this is how you deal with separation anxiety, it's not going to work for all clients any more than it's going to work for all dogs. And in the industry, I think, I see so many people who feel that they're not heard. They feel that they are dismissed. They feel they're not valued. Some of the most incredible professionals that I know have the lowest self-esteem. And there's a reason for that. And a lot of that might be from past experience, but a lot of it is also because the industry, there's a lot of the voices in the industry where there's a lot of an attempt to boost, and again, it comes from other people's feelings of being unsafe, that the response is to boost themselves by criticizing others, or boost themselves by saying, this is the only way to be an acceptable professional. You've got to do this route or nothing, those sorts of things just make people feel inadequate, make people feel imposter, all those sorts of things. And it all comes down to safety. I think it all comes down to people feeling that they're not safe and they're trying to make themselves safe. And sometimes people make themselves safe in a way that makes other people feel unsafe, or that make dogs feel unsafe for that matter.
And this is why we need more education, I think, on some of the factors that create some of the things that become problematic, and also on better ways for us to defend ourselves, especially boundary setting. And you know, other people quite often, as you say, they lash out based on their own challenges, sometimes their own, it's speaking through their own trauma or whatever it is, but that so that can be understandable, but that doesn't make it okay if that then has a knock-on effect. And it's looking at those kind of boundaries. And I think a lot of this also, I'm doing a webinar, I'm going to be putting the data soon, for professionals, just on how we untie ourselves from the expectations and judgments of others, because a lot of that is where it comes from with these things. But you're right, within our community, the industry, when we think about the credentialism, when we think about all the different routes in and everybody trying to protect their route as being the best route, the better route, some really valuable voices who post things, especially things that come out of that kind of, shall we say, standardized narrative. You know, we've lost some amazing voices over time. And when I think back to people, even Sarah, we're talking about Sarah, of course, Sarah's been talking about a lot of things for quite a while. And it's only now that some of those things are being seen. I think this might be because we've got the technology there where we can talk like you and I are now and having our group set up. So I think it's really interesting. And finding those safe spaces can be very hard online. You're doing a great job already with Heart Dog, the Facebook group, and we'll make sure we put the links in for that. I've tried to do that with Dog Centre Care, but it is challenging sometimes. It's difficult, I know. What is the thing for you then that you think is a really important first step when thinking about safety and well-being for practitioners, you know, for individual professionals?
So for people, for themselves, I think that there's a couple of things that I think are really important, and I think boundaries is one of them. So I think setting boundaries and being clear of your boundaries is really important. But I think there are a couple of things where I feel that a lot of people in the industry, and this comes back to expectations, it comes back to all the you should do it this way. There's a lot of people in this industry who are not following their heart. They're not actually doing something which is aligned to their values. So one of the things that's cropped up in Heart Dog a few times now, and we've only been, you know, we opened it about a month ago, are people saying, this really resonates with me, and I feel like what I'm doing isn't quite aligned with that. And there's an expectation. So people feel this is what I have to do. If I'm a dog trainer, this is what I have to do because this is what is expected. It's what the industry says I have to do. It's what clients are asking for, and so on. And actually, it's not. There is, you know, I think we get to actually be able to support people to stand up and say, you know what, I want to do it differently. I want to actually do something, which is what we're now doing here. Do things differently, talk about things differently, work with my clients differently, and do it in a way that actually aligns with what I believe is matters. Because when you come from that place, you'll be fundamentally rooted in your own confident in your own belief system in where you are. When you're doing something which isn't quite aligned, you're kind of like always on a bit of shaky ground. So I think that's the first thing, is to make it possible for people to, rather than telling them this is what a dog training business looks like, to tell them, you know, you create that, you make it what works for you and your clients. And fundamentally for me, and I've done a lot of work now with people in the last couple of years, working with people and in their businesses and mentoring people in their businesses and so on. What I've come to realize about that is that there is no single way that works. There are so many different ways, and there are people who need help, who need all those different things as well. So this idea that we have to do it this way because that's where the clients are is actually, there are some clients there. But if we change the way that we talk about it, and we can bring in other people, we can attract the people who are actually looking for the things that we're wanting to offer. So I think that's the first thing. And the other thing for me is self-care, is absolutely looking after yourself. And that is so hard, and it can look in lots of different things. So people tend to think of self-care as being sort of going to the spa and that sort of thing, which is obviously rubbish. I mean, for me, self-care can be clearing my space, you know, tidying my desk so that I don't feel like I'm being overwhelmed every time I sit down. It can be, this afternoon I actually went and made I've got the Harry Potter Lego castle. It's Hogwarts Castle. It is amazing. It's amazing. I've been working on it since Christmas, but I haven't done it for a while. And I went and did a bag of that. That was self-care for me, because it just took me away and let me actually do something completely different. Having some sort of regular opportunity and giving to yourself, because if you don't fill yourself up, you can't actually give out to anybody else. And well-being is all about, well, it's two things. One is giving yourself the things that fill you up, giving your dog the things that fill them up, but it's protecting yourself from pain or fear and those sorts of things. And I think we don't do for ourselves in this industry. We tend not to do that. We tend not to fill ourselves up. We're always giving out. It's an industry that's full of people who give, and who feel terribly guilty about having any time to themselves. And I think we've got to change that.
100%. And this is what's caused a part of the reason why we have an emotional health crisis, of course. Yeah. I think we do. And also, picking up on something you said there, I think also there's this notion of other people telling you what success looks like, even.
Yeah.
You know, success is very. And I think also it brings into focus the difference between passion and purpose, really. A lot of us come into this because they have a passion for working with dogs, but struggle to necessarily find that purpose, or that purpose takes, doesn't get a chance to kind of come through. And passion itself is important, and it gets us going and gets us doing stuff, but actually it's quite vulnerable, passion. Whereas purpose, when we find it, it's the thing that really drives us and allows us to deal with some of the negative things that come along. This is really important. I think, I was going to say something about that. So with Hard Dog then, you and Michelle, we'll get Michelle on in a second. I think it'd be great to have a little chat with Michelle. But what I love about what you've done already with that community is not put too many, or if any, constraints on what it is, because this is the whole point, isn't it? It's allowing people to find a safe space for that self-discovery, really. A lot of the stuff I've seen online previously is about almost pushing people through something to become something, rather than allowing people to find their own purpose, as I say, the thing that's really important for them. And the Hard Dog community has got big pretty quick, hasn't it? I think
we've got about 1,600 people in the last month. Yeah. So
when is Hard Dog as a thing then? When are you looking at kind of launching that? I know the website's got a bit of a holding page at the moment. What's the plans there?
Yeah, I mean, we have actually we've got a business. So we got that last week. It came to Isle of Man business. So we've sort of set that up, and we are planning we're going to do some stuff over September. We've got some events coming up in September, which will be free events, but also we'll be then launching a membership where we're exploring this in more detail in October.
Should we get Michelle in? Is she there? Is she free?
Michelle in? Is Michelle?
I'm lurking. Yeah.
You're lurking.
She's
okay,
lurking.
Come in. Bring your chair round. Try not to trip over the drill.
Yeah, what's
I have to say, you say about kind of keeping a nice, neat space as part of well-being. You've got a very neat office space there. I like everything.
Well,
So
you
it's
can
very-
see the background. You can't see my desk. If I pointed the camera down, thankfully I can't because it's on the computer, but it wouldn't look quite so tidy.
It did make me
Yeah,
laugh
so
when
good.
you were talking about having a nice tidy desk.
Yeah, we don't have much that's tidy in the space.
Hi, Andy.
Hey.
Hi, Michelle. Great to see you.
Awesome to see you.
And if Kieran's listening in, listen to what
Hi,
Janet
Kieran.
said about doing the Lego thing. So I've been waiting for a Lego Millennium Falcon for
Oh,
the
have
last
you?
8 years.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I love
you
it.
must come to the Isle of Man because we're setting up a Lego room, and
Wow.
for all the Lego. Lego is a bit of a joint thing that we do. So there you go. You get to find out a few of the crazinesses that we do.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like the idea of that. And maybe if Kieran can have a dolly room. I got him a life-size dolly for his birthday, right? Cut out.
Amazing.
What more does he need, right? Great to see you,
Absolutely.
Michelle. So tell me then, Michelle, how did Heart Dog come about with you two then? Were you just kind of sitting there having an ice cream on Isle of Man seafront or wherever you are thinking, let's
Do
just
that
think about this?
We genuinely do that regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's been something that's been burning inside of us for like a little while, where we're just sort of like, you know, we've always had a passion of working with people and dogs, but actually looking at things, and I know Janet's spoken into that over the last hour, but from a well-being perspective for all is just something that I think we were getting a little frustrated that we couldn't quite get it out there.
Yeah.
And so I think what gets to happen where you kind of align all three lenses together and really look at that as a focus is magic. So you know, rather than looking at, okay, this is awesome, we get to look at this for our dogs, amazing, we're gonna focus on these things, and then, you know, forgetting about the other two, or we're looking at, okay, right, this is what we want to do for our guardians, and we look at that conjunction with them and dogs, and then you actually often forget the third piece, which is the professionals, which I think, you know, you guys have been chatting a lot about, and I think, you know, those pieces all coming together gets to be magic. And I think for us, it's just been one of those things where we've been having our own musings offline for quite a while.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting is that it is actually getting to happen now. It's actually getting to come to the forefront. We're getting to have those conversations, you know, with professionals from all over the world who have been feeling the same things and are stepping out going, my goodness, it's like a breath of fresh air. It feels like, you know, you're coming home. You're getting a chance to really explore that with people in a community and a space that, you know, actually it has been quite hard for some people to find. So I think it's just really refreshing to be able to have those conversations and to explore the depth of, you know, what it means to say have choice. You know, what does it mean to have choice as a learner, and how can we give that to our dogs? How can we give that to our guardians? And, you know, what can we do when we don't get to have choice? And it's just so awesome to be able to discuss those topics, you know. Yeah,
I think choice and agency and other kind of parts of that, it'd be great to get you back to talk about just that, I think, because that
Really good on
yeah,
choice.
Michelle, right, let's get
Michelle,
It lights me
it's
up.
Michelle's absolute, she as a trainer as well, looking at that in terms of, you know, because we often think of choice, don't we, when we're training, we think, oh, we'll give them choice, and the choice is do what I want you to do, and we'll give you all this lovely stuff, or don't and get nothing. And you know, who wants that choice? You know, it's not a great choice. And really looking at how we can make choice real, you know, make choice meaningful, and the magic that happens when you do that. And one of the things we've been doing, Michelle's been going through some of the ways that to do that with some of our students, and who are trainers, and they come through, they go through and they work with their clients, and they come back and they say, oh, it's amazing, that just had an incredible impact, because we don't think it's going to happen, and somehow we're not trusting that our dogs are intelligent learners, and actually if they really enjoy learning, they will choose to learn. And if they don't want to learn in that moment, just like us, sometimes we just want to sit in front of the thing and do the mind numbing, we want to do the Netflix, you know, we want to do whatever it is that just lets us switch off. And I don't see why our dogs shouldn't feel the same. And sometimes we really want to get in there and we want to have these discussions and we want to do the musing and we want to really investigate how to do stuff and problem solve things or make Lego or whatever it is, you know, we want to do those things and we choose to do those things. So our dogs are the same. And I think that it's, for me, as I said at the beginning, I've stopped calling myself a dog trainer because I'm really a coach for people. That's really where I see myself. But Michelle is absolutely a dog trainer. And looking at this, what I really love about this now and working with Michelle, which I haven't had before, and I'm really loving it, is working with somebody who is completely aligned from the values perspective, but has a completely different skill set. So coming to it with a different skill set. And so what I love about this is that, you know, we can have those discussions, but you get to bring all that skill of actually working with dogs and how that you know, how that plays out in this.
I love that, getting to actually try and put it into practice and kind of go, well, does this work? Is, you know, this is how we're thinking about it, but what happens? You know, we think about choice. Well, what if we did just give our dogs completely free access to food all the time throughout training? And what does that do in terms of the connection, the enthusiasm, the optimism? You know, how does that help teach things like self-regulation of emotion and you know, all of those incredible things that we can kind of bring to the forefront? And then from there, how do we have those conversations with the caregivers, the guardians that we're working with, to enroll them in the concept? Because it's so far from, you know, the reality that I think a lot of people live every day, where they're like, you know, they're contacting you because they're at their wit's end. They're really in pain with, you know, something that's going on, whether their dog is struggling around people or the dogs, or whether, you know, they're having a hard time leaving the house because their dog is struggling with separation. And, you know, sometimes we have our own ideas of, you know, these things are all really amazing and important, but if we don't know how to translate that information or understand, you know, where our clients are, how are we going to be able to implement that in a way that creates meaningful shift wider than our own community?
So that's really important. And I think this is the important thing about, I call it connecting through the emotional experience, because we all have one, and there's a lot that is very unique to us. There's also a lot that we share. And even listening to what you were saying there, Janet, we can all relate to the difference between being willing learning participants and going through an arbitrary sense of being taught something. And we can just remember that from school, because we forget most of the stuff that from school, apart from the stuff that we thought, wow, that was cool, and I will totally come back after school for that.
I was such a geek.
Yeah.
There's always one, of course. But, and you must have gone to a great school, I think, to kind of keep that going. And I think there has to be an element of connection from the learner. There has to be an element of kind of connection from the teacher. And that's when wonderful things happen. And also it's important to recognize there's a big difference between what we're taught and what we learn.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. I know, let's get you back then, Michelle. I think that would be really cool to kind of look at some of that, because one thing I think that's important with this kind of shift, and I try and put this across a lot, because again, I read some of the stuff that people say that I represent, and I go like, oh, this guy's anti-training, or this guy reckons we shouldn't do anything, or whatever. And it's like, it's not about that. It's about thinking about more now. I think we've fought our hard battles about the move to positive reinforcement, great, but that shouldn't be the end of the story. It's like, and also I know a lot of people want to look at different names for themselves, and they think, well, I don't want to think about being a doctor, but this is not about there being a problem with that term dog trainer either. We can call ourselves whatever you like.
No, I don't have any problem with a dog thing. I've just always felt a little bit of a fraud, because I'm actually not. I haven't been a technical dog trainer for a long time. I mean, I joined the APDT, did my assessment, all those sorts of things. But most of what I've done since has been working with humans around their dog's behavior. And
I'm the same as you. I wasn't actually thinking about you there, actually. I was just thinking, I was celebrating Michelle for saying I'm a dog trainer. That was the point I was going to make, and there's nothing, and that's great. And it's a case of thinking, right, I really enjoy the connection I have with dogs through training, but how can we make that more equitable? How can we get that so everybody's more involved? Because I think we can all recognize that dog training became quite an arbitrary, one-sided, unconnected task at one point in that development. And we're all shifting about how we look at these things differently. And I think bringing more choice into true choice. I saw a video recently of somebody, it's a great video, and the dog, trying to get the dog getting close to the car, and the dog would come a bit and then they'd stop, and the trainer was saying, yeah, this is great because I'm giving the dog choice. But the point was there was still an expectation that the dog would end up in the car, right? Yeah. So actually, like you said, there was just that choice of, okay, you don't have to move forwards, but I'm going to wait here until you're ready to keep moving. Yeah. So it's not real choice then, really. There is a choice. Yeah, there is a choice. It's very arbitrary. It's quite binary, yes or no.
And those expectations are so important. So we have, I think that's a mind shift that we have to make within the industry, that we have this thing that if we start, I mean, you probably also had this when you were starting out. I don't know whether it's now a thing, but if you ask your dog to do something, or rather it was at that time, it was you tell your dog they've got to do it. You can't allow them not to do it. That was a thing. And for a long time, really, even up to, I mean, maybe it's still, I don't know, but that whole thing is still out there, that you cue something, it has to happen. And the whole concept of choice for me is the dog can opt out at any point, and that is okay. That is as good a choice as anything else. And I think one of the things
not only okay, celebrate it.
Celebrate it. Yeah, it's as good a choice as anything else. It's not, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an important form of feedback as well, isn't it? And I think totally. I think it is still the norm. I've always said this notion. I've seen some memes on social media talking about the difference between a cue and a command in a very nice kind of way. But you know what? If we're giving a cue and expecting a response, it's kind of a command, really. It doesn't matter whether you fluff it up a little bit. But I think the general public, though, they are still. I use the kind of try to define things in the difference between task and care, because they have different orientations, especially psychologically, and it can be very easy to get stuck in task. And I think many caregivers are stuck in task when we meet them. The task being, I must get my dog to stop pulling, must get my dog to stop barking, or whatever that can be. And I find, actually, you were saying earlier, Janet, that some professionals, they get stuck working a certain way because they think that's what the client's going to want, and they're worried if they do something a little bit differently, the client will go down the road somewhere else. But actually, that is not my experience. And because whilst the average owner may have an outlook of what their dog's care and support and learning needs are that is 180 away from reality, not always, of course, because some are really in tune.
Oh yeah.
The second thing we do know is that they really care about the dogs, and if we support those care circuits, I think it can be very empowering for them, right? Michelle, you were saying earlier about this, the human being inspired by thinking, wow, isn't that cool? Isn't it cool what choice can do? Isn't it amazing to see what I can do when it's more of an invitation?
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful, and I love that reframing of it as, that emotional, that care journey around, well, what is it like if you just try to put yourself in that position right now, and we get that empathy, we get that look, because like you say, actually people are reaching out to you because they really care about their dogs. They adore their dog. They want them to, be able to enjoy life and relax and have, great experiences. And I think when we think of it in that way, I mean, of course, we're going to be able to have those conversations. And I think it becomes one of our own fears that it's not going to land well because it's a bit different to, what somebody else might be doing. But I think getting to have those conversations and look at things from that, and then reframe what success looks like. Because when you think about, traditionally success is, I cue something, my dog does it. And yes, awesome, great. My dog's doing those things that I cue more and more often, I'm successful. But that's not really what success is when we get down to it, because when we think about looking at the emotional journey, we think about looking at what does this individual need right now? It might be the ability to opt out of something and choose activities that are going to help calm them down, that are going to get them centered again and able to think cognitively and make choices again. So for me, in that sort of scenario, a dog that goes, actually, need to take 5, I'm just going to go over here and sniff this bush, that for me is like the ultimate success, because you know, it goes from us being like trying to look at body language, trying to look at you know, interpretation of how our dogs might be feeling. And when they start to go, hang on a moment, I need some time, and they start that conversation, that communication, that's the ultimate success. And that's actually the opposite of what the traditional success of my dog did this thing was. Actually, my dog didn't do this thing, but I am overjoyed, because that is way more important than, can you stand here for 10 seconds? The fact that you're telling me you can't is just, we've got to celebrate. I mean, that's totally. That's what we should be aiming. So
and where it becomes the dog able to communicate that, I think that's really important, rather than us interpreting, because I think that's the other thing that we learn from observations is going right back to the beginning of the conversation, that the whole thing that I've learned from the TTouch and the ACE observations is let's not interpret straight off the bat. Let's try and just see what we see, and let that and learn from what we're seeing, rather than saying this means that because that's what I've been taught that it means. It may not mean that, and so this is allowing that communication, I think is such a powerful thing to do.
Well, we were talking earlier about the importance of being heard. The same goes for the dog, right? And I think what's ended up happening, especially in the last few years, I think, on the kind of progressive side of the dog training industry, is a rush to do things faster. How do we prove things quicker? All of these kind of things that kind of go on. And what you were saying there, Michelle, I think reminds me of what Mandy Wilson was talking about in her dog centre care chat. Mandy was looking at things from the learning experience point of view, and looking at the difference between attainment and achievement. This is definitely shifting from attainment, the attaining of something in an arbitrary session, to what is achieving, what those achievements are for that individual dog. And quite often it, even a dog, Michelle, who can say, right, I need to have a break now, and I'm going to go over there and I'm going to sniff that bush. That could be a huge moment. I'm just thinking about a dog that I worked with recently who did that, and I thought, wow, that's probably the first sign of a little bit of self-regulation from this dog who's trying to show something. Now, if we'd have got the dog back and think, right, we're going to have to ramp up the reinforcer now because we're going to keep the dog doing this, that one moment of self-regulation for that dog's been lost, right?
Yeah, that is such an important thing. And I think, you know, that thing we just said there about ramping up the reinforcement and trying whatever means necessary to positively reward a behavior, and what do I need in order to motivate the dog? It's coercion by another sense, you know, because what we're saying there is that opting out isn't a successful alternative. It isn't something that we can, you know, in that sense, that's not really open to the dogs. So I mean, I love adding the choice in and seeing that little glimmer of, you know, just realization that they get a chance to go and do what it is that they really need right in that moment, that they're meeting their own needs. And I remember the moment where I put this into place with probably one of my most difficult cases that I worked when I was living in Devon years ago now. It was a Doberman called Trevor, and he was such a great name.
Hey, Trev.
Yeah, Trev. And he really struggled. He was an adolescent. He was going through really hard time during adolescence, and he would grab things, mouth them. He was really strong. He was a big dog, and he would also grab hold and hump entire bodies. I mean, not just legs, because he was that big. And it became really unsafe around, you know, the young children at the time. And I remember this incredible moment where we were doing choice-based protocols. We had all sorts of enrichment out that would help to kind of, you know, relax him, and he got to go off and do those, and was encouraged to do that through that. The moment where he went, no, I don't want to do another repetition, and he went off and he grabbed a Kong and he laid down and he chewed it, and he soothed himself back to a place where he could function, was incredible. And actually was, you know, we think about what our, you know, guardians are looking for. That was the moment that had such an impact for them. It wasn't, oh, look, he laid down on his bed and he chose to be there. It was the moment where he chose to do something that helped himself calm down and was able to avoid doing some of those pattern behaviors, you know, that he would go into because he just couldn't cope with, you know, that level of arousal in any sense. So,
and also I think that caregivers, owners, guardians, however you want to kind of title them, I find there's more of a resistance to the stiffness of arbitrary training than there is to the invariably doing a bit less, slowing things down, allowing more fluidity. That's better, right? And I think a lot of the professionals listening, don't be afraid of introducing some of this stuff, because in my experience, and I know you've had the same, people connect to it way better, actually, because then they're not into the geeky stuff. They're not trying to be another dog trainer.
And that is a really important thing, I think, that a lot of, because we've had this response that, oh, well, how do I sell this? How to sell it in the sense of convince people that this is the way forward for my clients, because they're expecting something. But actually, I think you're right. I think that the expectation is actually coming from the industry. It's coming from the professionals. We're there thinking we have to do it this way, because if we don't do it this way, we're going to be judged. We're going to be judged as not doing it right, you know. And there's that whole kind of thing around whether or not we are we're good enough, and we're all living with that. And I think that it is giving, the more that we can normalize this and make this the way that is an acceptable way to do things, rather than we've got to go and do loads of training and for the sake of training, then I think that will help people, because there is a lot of expectations, and the weight of expectations on people is huge, I think.
Yeah, and I think even the way we kind of accredit people, I encourage people to see their yearly or 2-yearly reassessment, like having a driving test. You know, we don't all drive how we drive on that driving test, right? So you don't have to worry about doing things, you know, hugely differently and then not being, because, you know, if we did things differently, there are some organizations, associations that celebrate that, and they're looking mainly for how you as an individual connect to the learner, both dog and human, and that actually is a higher element than actually what you physically do, you know. But there's still a lot of the traditional stuff which is very clipboardy, ticky box, and that's the kind of thing. Right, we're a bit over, but that's great, because it was great to have both of you. But I think
we're always over.
I'd like to deep dive on that a little bit. Maybe you'd like to come in, Michelle, and have a chat. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you. I just wanted to say something at the end, really, because I think it's really important that we remind ourselves of this sometimes. I had a week of a couple of communications. So I had a email from a lady over in the States who was married and kids, and then the relationship broke down, but she was always aware of her sexuality, and now she's almost learning to love again, as she put it. And she sent me a message to say how important it was to hear me on podcasts and various conversations just talk so freely about my husband. And I thought, wow, because I don't think of it, right? And I value that, and it's very hard fought, of course, that I'm even married to the love of my life and anything else. But and then I had another message from somebody who was saying about their a family member who was transitioning, and again how amazing it was just to hear it just said in a very casual way, and to kind of be able to talk about things. And I know for you two, you're very open as being you know, in a loving relationship as well as a business one. How you do the two, I don't know. Me and Kieran, we couldn't
well,
quite
we're
manage
at
that.
early stage for the business one, so yeah.
We'll check back in with you. But I just think, I thought I'd mention it because you were talking earlier, obviously, about this notion of safety and well-being, and I think we have to remember what it is to be those positive role models, I think. And obviously wonderful Sandy Sharma with her conference recently, highlighting on people of color and different ethnicities within the industry. I think it's just important. I thought I'd throw that in at the end because you were saying earlier, Janet, you don't really think about it, and I don't really, but it does make a difference, doesn't it?
It does make a difference. Absolutely. Yeah. It does make a difference. And to be able to be open, and that is a great, it's a joy, really. It is a joy. And it's not, like you say, it's not something that's always been there. And it's not something that's there for everybody now. So the fact that, I mean, I always feel a little bit, I came out quite late in life, and I've never really had anything other than a bit of a sort of double take on things. But I know that that's not the reality for a lot of people. And I think that for me, this whole thing of being able to be who you are, this is who we are, and it's important, and be able to be with the person that you love is important. It's part of what makes us human, makes us you know, going back to well-being, fundamental to well-being is to be able to be freely with the person you love, if that's what you choose. And
I think a lot of the time we kind of forget that it's not like that for a lot of people, you know, that actually to be openly out and, you know, love for who you are, and not just whether you tick certain, you know, conforming to certain things boxes, you know, and actually, you know, it's not been like that for a lot of people in the world. So, you know, we kind of forget because it's not something that we've had really an adverse reaction to in the world, that actually that's not the case for others. And, you know, just by being, you know, open about who you are, and actually not worried about, you know, things that happen, actually, it's just, I think it can really help to connect to people who maybe aren't there. And I think the more that we can have those conversations, that, you know, we actually start to see what is happening out there in the world, then we can have those conversations. Because, you know, if people don't get to be themselves, then we don't get to have those conversations. We don't get to, you know, inspire change in the world so that it is safe for everybody. Because I think it really does come back to safety. It comes back to everything. Because if you don't feel like you can really be the person that you are inside on the outside, then that is the complete opposite of safety. It's the complete opposite of well-being. It's the complete opposite of being able to show up as, you know, the person that you really are destined to be, because you know, you're always worried, there's always that anxiety there. So I think, you know, the more that we can do to showcase and to just, you know, support other people who may be not in that position to have those conversations, and, you know, to nurture people and to be there, and, you know,
I think it's more because I think underpinning all this stuff that we've been talking about today, from the well-being point of view and the dogs and the humans, and then sharing a bit about us and you know, being able to have that kind of freedom of expression, if you like, and especially one of love. There's a bigger picture thing here, which is about us breaking away from a lot of the indoctrinations into that notion of good to bad continuum that we talk about in human psychology. And you know, whether that's the way that we see children more now, and especially recognizing behavior as not only an expression of need, but what you were referencing there, Michelle, an expression of self. And I know myself, you know, I didn't come out until my kind of early 20s, but going through that, my expression of self wasn't there. And this was back in the day of Thatcher, and you know, a very kind of quite a negative environment for LGBTQ. So actually, all these things, there's a lot more going on here than just us thinking about how we might support the dog better or support the human better. There's actually a bigger picture thing about how we all try and break away from some of the more traditional constraints about who we are as individuals. And like I said earlier, those expectations and judgments often presented by somebody else who does not have our, or in my case, my lived experience, is quite profound, right?
Yeah, totally.
And that's why us sharing love and the positivity that you guys do, we love, you know, we're always cheering for Janet and Michelle, right? Because and you look great together, by the way, so it's always good. It looks great. And I know, you know, Kieran has more followers than I do, mainly because of his TikTok, of course.
His TikTok is amazing.
TikTok is
we
fabulous.
love his TikTok.
If there's anyone watching that hasn't seen Kieran's TikTok, you have
It's
to.
fantastic.
He has his
I've been to events when I was involved in the charter, for example, meeting some of these people involved in other organisations and that I didn't know. The first thing they'd be like, I know your husband. I love his TikTok.
No, it's TikTok.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's brilliant.
Okay, well, look, it's been amazing speaking to you both. And
Lovely.
what we'll do is obviously head over to the Hot Dog Facebook group, because that's where the vibe's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll make sure we share those links in with chat today.
Yeah.
Good luck with it. It's going to be great. It's what's really needed, and you know, I think
Absolutely.
it's a really exciting
We're
time.
very excited by it. We've got an event that we're doing in September, which is free for people. So we can, should we put the link of that in the?
Oh yes, please
for
do.
people
And
to
look,
register for that. If
I'll pre-authorize both of you on Dog Centre Care. You can share whatever you like when you like, because I think it's really important. And if we can get as many of our members over that are looking at finding these safe spaces, then that's really great, because Dog Centre Care is just a chance for people to gather really and find their space. And I'm hoping people will find that space over at Hot Dog, because that'll be great. Good. Well, there's loads of great comments in the chat, by the way. I've been trying to look at them.
I should come around and look at the chat. I haven't been able to, because I've not got Facebook open. So I will come around afterwards and we'll check in at the chat, won't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We can jump back in. Yeah.
And we'll get you in, Michelle. We'll have a chat about your side of stuff. I think it'll be really cool.
I'd love that. Super awesome.
Thanks everybody for listening in. We've got Lauren McCall here on Sunday, 7 o'clock UK time. Lauren, well known within TTouch actually, but now doing most of her education and her work within animal communication. I think it's another great, interesting conversation.
I'm really interested to come and listen to something I don't know anything much about. So I really want to come.
Well, Lauren and Helen, you know, I've been following Lauren for a while, and then it turns out she goes and moves to Torquay. So we've been out a couple of times. We were having afternoon tea the other day, just like or luncheon, as Kieran likes to call it.
I thought she was in the States.
No, Lauren's in Torquay. So how exciting is that?
Okay.
You've all jumped ship from Devon now. You see, you've buggered off to the Isle of Man.
We have.
I know, right?
The Isle of Man. We love the Isle of Man.
The irony of moving to the Isle of Man, eh? But they should be the Isle of Woman now, really. I think.
Absolutely.
Oh, funny stuff.
Brilliant. Well, nice to see you. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and see you soon. And thanks again, Janet and Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Guys.
Bye.